In the heart of Houston, a wedding unlike any other was taking place. The air buzzed with excitement as high-profile guests, church leaders, legal professionals, and political figures gathered to witness what many called the perfect union. Pastor Dion Waverly, a man of unwavering faith, had spent years preaching about love, commitment, and purity. His congregation adored him, and thousands looked up to him as a beacon of righteousness. Judge Saw Caldwell, on the other hand, was a force to be reckoned with in the courtroom. Known for her sharp mind, disciplined nature, and no-nonsense attitude, she had climbed the ranks quickly, becoming one of the most respected federal judges in Texas. When news broke that these two powerhouses were coming together, the public was mesmerized. A pastor and a judge. It was a match seemingly ordained by God himself. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. Hidden beneath the dazzling lights and extravagant floor arrangements, there was something lurking in the shadows. Something no one could see. And within 24 hours, that darkness would consume them both. They met at a charity gala, one of those elegant events where powerful people gathered, smiling through their expensive suits and designer dresses, networking over champagne. Dion was there as a guest speaker, delivering a sermon on faith and integrity. Saw was being honored for her contributions to criminal justice reform. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, everything else faded. It was magnetic, instant. Dion was captivated by Saw's confidence, the way she commanded attention without trying. She was brilliant, poised, the kind of woman any man would dream of. And for Saw, Dion was unlike any man she had met before. Strong, deeply principled, a man who carried himself with purpose. 6 months later, they were engaged. To their followers, it was the ultimate love story. To those who knew them personally, it was a little fast. But love has a way of blinding people to the things they don't want to see. And the truth was that they barely knew each other. What they were about to discover, in the most brutal way possible, was that love built on rushed decisions is like a house of cards. One wrong move and everything collapses. After the grand ceremony, the newlyweds checked into a luxurious honeymoon suite in a 5-star hotel. Everything was set for the perfect night. The champagne was chilled, the bed was covered in rose petals, and the city lights shimmered outside their window. For Dion, this was a moment, the night he had waited for his entire life. A man of faith, he had practiced what he preached. Purity until marriage. This was the first time he would experience true intimacy with his wife. But something was off. At first, it was subtle, a small, nagging sensation in the back of his mind. Maybe it was just nerves. But then, the smell hit him. It wasn't perfume. It wasn't sweat. It was something rotting. Dion stiffened, his body reacting before his mind could make sense of it. He tried to ignore it, brushing it off as paranoia. But as he moved closer to Saw, it became undeniable. The smell was coming from her. His stomach turned. His pulse quickened. He fought the instinct to recoil, to gag. And that's when Saw spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, avoiding his eyes. Dion's breath caught in his throat. Something about the way she said it, soft, hesitant, almost afraid, made his skin crawl. And then the confession began. Saw sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly. She had spent years building her reputation, controlling every aspect of her life. But here, in this moment, she had no control. "Dion, I have a condition, a medical issue. I've been dealing with infections for a long time." Dion didn't move. He didn't speak. She continued, "It's because of my past." The room felt like it had been drained of air. "My lifestyle before all of this, it wasn't what you think. I wasn't always careful. I wasn't always disciplined." And then the final blow. "I've been with over 50 men." Silence. Dion's vision blurred. His world tilted. This woman, the one he believed to be pure, the one he had chosen above all others, had a past he never could have imagined. He had spent his life preaching about purity, about waiting for the one, about building a foundation on faith and righteousness. And now, he felt like he had been tricked, betrayed. "You lied to me," he whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. Saw reached for his hand. He pulled away. "I thought you deserved to know the truth," she said. And that's when he made the decision that would change everything. "I want a divorce." Saw froze. The judge who had commanded entire courtrooms, who had sentenced criminals to life behind bars without blinking, was now reduced to a stunned, heartbroken woman. "You're joking," she said. Dion shook his head. Saw's hands clenched into fists. "You are not leaving me. Not now. Not like this." She moved to block the door. Dion stepped back, his own rage boiling over. "You tricked me," he shouted. "You let me believe I was marrying someone who—" Slap! The sound echoed through the room. Saw's breathing was heavy, her eyes wild with desperation. "You are not leaving," she screamed. She lunged at him, grabbing his arm, nails digging into his skin. And in that moment, pure instinct, pure desperation, Dion shoved her. She stumbled. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. She fell. The back of her head hit the sharp edge of the nightstand. A sickening crack. Then silence. Dion stood frozen. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His mind screamed at him to do something. But it was too late. Blood pooled beneath her head, soaking into the expensive carpet. Her eyes, one so full of confidence and fire, stared blankly at the ceiling. She was gone. And just like that, the wedding of the year became a crime scene. The air in the honeymoon suite was thick. Thick with tension, with shock, with something unspoken that neither of them had the courage to address. Dion Waverly had walked into this room expecting love, intimacy, a new beginning. But what he had found instead was a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Judge Saw Caldwell's confession lingered in the air like a ghost, refusing to be ignored. "I've been with over 50 men. I've had medical complications because of it." His hands were still shaking. His mind was spinning. How had he not seen this? How had he been so blind? Dion felt something rising inside him, a storm of emotions he had never experienced before. He had waited his entire life for this moment, waited in obedience, in faith, in devotion. For what? His stomach twisted, his breath quickened, and then that smell hit him again, that rotting, unnatural scent. It was coming from her, from his wife. The realization sent a fresh wave of revulsion through him. He couldn't do this. He couldn't be here. And that's when he said it. "I want a divorce." Saw's eyes went wide. Her whole body stiffened. A judge, a woman of power, a woman who had sentenced criminals to life in prison without hesitation. And yet, here she was, frozen in disbelief. "You're joking," she said, her voice eerily calm. Dion shook his head. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She was calculating, assessing, trying to regain control of the situation, just like she did in the courtroom. "You don't mean that," she finally said, her voice sharp but wavering underneath. "I do," Dion replied. The mask began to crack. "You're not leaving me," she snapped, her calmness slipping into something more dangerous. She took a step forward. Dion instinctively took a step back. Saw let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You are going to embarrass me? In front of the whole world? You think you can just walk away?" Dion's jaw clenched. "You lied to me," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled. "You let me believe I was marrying someone who—" Slap! The sound echoed through the room. His face burned where her hand had struck him, his vision blurred with shock. And then, before he could react, she lunged at him. Her hand grabbed his shirt, pulling, shaking. Her nails dug into his skin. "You are not walking out on me," she screamed, her voice shrill, filled with a kind of desperation he had never seen before. Dion struggled to break free, his heart pounding. He had never hit a woman before, never even imagined it, but something inside him snapped, and that's when it happened. Dion shoved her. Hard. He didn't mean to push her that hard, or maybe he did. All he knew was that he needed her off of him, but Saw wasn't expecting it. Her foot caught on the edge of the hotel rug. She lost her balance. Time seemed to slow as her body twisted midair. Her head struck the sharp edge of the nightstand with a sickening crack. Then silence. Dion's chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands trembled. "Saw!" No response. He stepped closer, his breath shallow. Blood pooling beneath her head. Her eyes open, blank, lifeless. His stomach clenched. His knees felt weak. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. Judge saw Caldwell, his wife, a woman of power, a woman feared by many, was dead, and he had killed her. Dion sat on the floor, staring at her motionless body. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. He wasn't sure. He had no plan. What was he supposed to do? Pray? Call for help? Run? His whole life, his career, his reputation, everything he had built was over. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached for his phone. His hands were still shaking as he dialed 911. My wife, she fell. She's not breathing. The operator's voice was calm. Sir, I need you to stay where you are. Help is on the way. But it was too late for help. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived. The police weren't far behind. They found Dion exactly where he had been, frozen, still wearing his wedding ring, staring at his dead wife as reality sank in. As officers led him away in handcuffs, he whispered the same words over and over. It wasn't supposed to be like this, wasn't supposed to be like this. Dion Waverly was charged with manslaughter. Some believed it was self-defense. Others believed his disgust and rage had driven him to kill. And then there were those who saw it for what it truly was. A marriage built on lies, expectations, and illusions, doomed from the start. But the real question? Did Saw Caldwell deserve what happened to her? Or was she simply a victim of a man's inability to handle the truth? Dion Waverly stood frozen. The air in the honeymoon suite felt suffocating, thick with something heavier than grief. His wife, Judge Saw Caldwell, lay sprawled on the floor. Her lifeless eyes stared at nothing, her head resting in a growing pool of blood. The room that had been filled with passion, whispers of forever, and champagne toast just hours earlier was now a crime scene. Dion's heart pounded against his ribs. What had he done? His hands trembled as he took a step forward. Then another. His voice cracked. No response. He knelt beside her. His fingers brushed against her cheek. Ice cold. His chest tightened. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was supposed to be their beginning. Not her end. Not his downfall. His whole life, he had preached about righteousness, about patience, about waiting for the right partner. Had he just thrown it all away in a single moment? Then reality snapped into place. The blood, the body, the fact that she wasn't breathing. His mind screamed at him. Do you owe something? He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911. My wife, she fell. She hit her head. She's not breathing. The operator's voice was calm. Sir, stay where you are. Help is on the way. Dion dropped the phone. Help? Help couldn't bring Saw back. And help wouldn't erase the terrible truth. He was responsible for her death. When the police arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The officers moved swiftly through the suite, their eyes scanning every inch of the blood-splattered room. Dion was still sitting on the floor, his hands covered in Saw's blood, his gaze unfocused. One officer knelt beside him. Sir, can you tell us what happened? Dion inhaled sharply. How was he supposed to explain it? That he had shoved his wife in a moment of rage? That she had fallen, hit her head, and never got up? That he never meant for any of this to happen? I didn't mean to. His voice was barely a whisper. The officers glanced at one another. They had heard that before. Another detective stepped forward. Sir, we're going to need you to stand up. Cold steel wrapped around Dion's wrists. Handcuffs. The weight of them made it real. The respected pastor, the man who had preached about love, patience, and faith, was now a murder suspect. The media exploded. A well-known pastor accused of killing his powerful judge wife. This wasn't just news. It was a national scandal. Cameras flashed as Dion was led into court in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, his once proud demeanor reduced to nothing. The prosecution painted a damning picture. A man so disgusted by his wife's past that he chose to end her life rather than face the truth. They called him a fraud, a liar, a man who built a career on morality, but let his own anger turn him into a killer. The defense, however, had another argument. This was an accident, a tragic, emotional reaction, not murder. They claimed Dion had acted in self-defense, that Saad attacked him first, that he had only pushed her away to escape. The jury sat stiffly, taking in both sides. Was this a crime of passion or a premeditated act of violence? And then, the prosecution played the 911 call. My wife, she fell. She hit her head. She's not breathing. A murmur spread through the courtroom. There was no panic in his voice, no desperation, no urgency, just cold acceptance. And that was enough. Dion Waverly was convicted of manslaughter. The judge's gavel slammed against a wooden bench. Mr. Waverly, you are sentenced to 15 years in prison for the manslaughter of Saad Caldwell. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Some said it was too harsh. Others said it was too lenient. But the truth? Dion would serve far more than just 15 years. He would serve a lifetime of guilt. A lifetime of remembering the look in Saad's eyes before she fell. A lifetime of knowing that if he had just walked away, just taken a deep breath, just controlled his emotions, she would still be alive. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a warning. A warning about the danger of secrets. A warning about how one moment of anger can destroy everything. And most importantly, a warning about what happens when love is built on lies instead of truth. If Saad had been honest about her past from the start, if Dion had truly accepted his wife for who she was instead of who he wanted her to be, if they had taken their time, truly understood each other, would this have happened? Maybe. Or maybe they could have walked away before it was too late.